In the previous video about Agitprop, I laid out the fundamentals and the theory of modern Agitprop, but I did not delve enough into examples. Now this video will examine examples of Agitprop. Now the purpose is to get a more firm grasp on the mechanism and less about praising or critiquing the right or the left respectively for doing it. So with that said, let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to what is basically part 2 research and analysis episode on Agitprop. Now in the first part I laid out the research, and in this part I hope to explain the practice and much more and in depth using simple but sufficient examples. We'll see how it goes. Alright, so without further ado, example 1. Coming from The Independent, Lego ends advertising with Daily Mail after calls for companies to stop funding hate. And I'll read it in its entirety because it is a remarkably telling article. And goes like this, quote, Lego will stop advertising its products in the Daily Mail following a public campaign calling on big companies to drop adverts from newspapers accused of promoting hatred, discrimination, and demonization, the company has announced. The Danish firm, which has previously run free giveaways in the newspaper, responded to social media campaigners Stop Funding Hate by tweeting, "We have finished the agreement with the Daily Mail and are not planning any future promotional activity with the newspaper." Stop Funding Hate urges advertisers to rethink their quote-unquote support for right-wing newspapers over what it sees as misleading headlines about child refugees and the recent ruling by High Court judges that Parliament must be consulted before Article 50 is triggered. A spokesperson for the campaign said Stop Funding Hate welcomes the decision from Lego. "We are asking brands to listen to their customers when they tell them they want to stop funding hate, and that is what they've done. People are becoming more aware that the money they spend could end up supporting publications whose stories, language, or portrayal of certain people fuels division. This urgently needs to be addressed, I think. These headlines harm people." Lego is the first big company to agree to the campaigners' demands. The Co-op Group has said it is reviewing its advertising, but other companies have until now refused to withdraw their adverts. John Lewis, another key target of the campaign, said, "We fully appreciate the strength of feeling on this issue, but we never make an editorial judgment on a particular newspaper." Waitrose and Marks & Spencer are also being urged to drop their Christmas advertising in certain tabloids. Lego spokesperson Roar Rudid Trangbeck told The Independent, quote, "We spend a lot of time listening to what children have to say, and when parents and grandparents take the time to let us know how they feel, we always listen just as carefully. We are both humbled and honored to see how much consumers all over the world express their care for our company and our brand, and we will continuously do our very best to live up to the trust and faith that people all around the world show us every day. The agreement with Daily Mail has finished, and we have no plans to run any promotional activity with the newspaper in the foreseeable future." The announcement was welcomed by BBC presenter Gary Lineker, who has backed the Stop the Hate campaign and today announced he had spoken to Walkers, whose crisps he promotes, about withdrawing their adverts from The Sun. A Daily Mail spokesman said, "Our agreement with Lego has finished and we have no plans to run any promotional activity with Lego in the foreseeable future." The original agreement had been for a promotional campaign of free giveaways rather than an advert, he added. It comes a week after a British father's letter to Lego regarding their links with the Daily Mail went viral. Bob Jones, who said his 6-year-old son loves Lego, wrote an open letter to the company after the Daily Mail ran a controversial front page calling the High Court judges who ruled the Parliament must be given a say on Brexit enemies of the country. Well, they were, but anyway. He wrote, quote, I love Lego. My 6-year-old son loves Lego. He inherited all of mine 3 years ago, and his collection has multiplied many times since. It seems you can do no wrong. But I am concerned. For a few years now, you have done free giveaways in the Daily Mail newspapers, but I'm afraid to say I can no longer do it. Mr. John said the paper's recent headlines had gone too far and did nothing but create distrust of foreigners, blame immigrants for everything, and as of yesterday are now having a go at top judges in the United Kingdom for being gay whilst making a legal judgment. He added, quote, Lego to me has always been an inclusive product, breaking barriers between gender, building children's imagination and confidence to do their own thing, something adults and children can and do bond over. Your links to the Daily Mail are wrong, and a company like yours shouldn't be supporting them. And as crap as I feel telling my son he can't have the free Lego kit that he sees on the front of the paper in the store, I have explained to him that the paper it is attached to is the sort of paper that tells lies about people, like some of his friends from school. Even my 6-year-old understands that what they print is wrong. The Stop Funding Hate campaign was founded in August following what it said was, quote, hatred, discrimination and demonization, close quote, being promoted by some newspapers. So, this is basically the kind of Agitprop campaign that I would like to see done on the right daily. And it can be done with much more success than this garbage. This is the kind of Agitprop campaign that I was advocating in my video How to Agitprop Within the Left, the SPLC. So, step by step, how did they do it? Well, step 1, identify the most efficient agitator, and in this case they used one leftist father's letter, which could have reasonably been entirely fabricated, if you ask me. I mean, if I were a leftist, I would have totally fabricated that story and intentionally worked to make it viral. Or look up a father willing to sign the letter after I had previously written it in advance to hit all the appropriate buzzwords. In fact, this is most likely what did happen. But anyway, fake or not, the first step was to find the appropriate agitator to serve as the initial venue to lay out the case of the political project. In this case, the political project of encroaching into the revenue of the media outlets of the opposition. Step 2. Agitators start referencing each other, creating the bubble that this position is widely held, even though it isn't. They achieved this by giving the impression that the letter had gone viral. It actually hadn't, but that's besides the point. Step 3. Get institutional support, and in this case they got a BBC cuck to support the initiative. Now, he wasn't a particularly prominent individual, but it didn't have to be, because the target was weak too. I mean, come on, Lego is a Danish company. If you want to make a Dane shit his pants, say something bad about him on the BBC. Problem solved. And of course, step 4, Lego surrenders, game over, subversion complete. Now it really is that simple if you follow the steps and the Agitprop method. Now before we go to the next example, it is worth noting that this particular operation is done from a position of weakness, which is why right-wingers should pay attention to it, because this is usually where we found ourselves in since the left is the establishment. The way to deal with this and still achieve success was, in this case, to cast a wide net. They didn't just target Lego, they targeted as many brands as they could, fully aware that most of the answers they'll get will be, yeah, no, we don't care, goodbye. Or as the more polite version delivered by John Lewis, quote, we fully appreciate the strength of feeling on this case, but we never make an editorial judgment on a particular newspaper. Which is basically, yeah, we get it that it hits you in the feels, but we don't give two hoots about your feelings. Now, this Stop Funding Hate campaign should be Chapter 1 in the Agitprop 101 manual, which I might end up writing in the end. But no, seriously, they hit all the right points. Before releasing their attack, they made sure to project an image of being big. Their Facebook page, which is their central hub, had at least 70,000 likes at the moment they launched their first attack. Yet for some reason, their growth rate looks horribly abnormal. And I say this as someone who has administered Facebook pages for highly popular causes and brands. Moreover, most of their fans seem to be from Spain and Portugal. Now, why would this page be so popular in Spain and Portugal? Or, to put it more in context, why would a British campaign aimed at convincing generally British brands to stop advertising in British newspapers be so popular in Portugal? Now, I get it that there are quite a few British immigrants in Spain, but still, the math that just simply doesn't add up. Unless a significant minority of the likes, roughly a third if I were to make an educated guess, are, well, bought and paid for from various click farms. But then again, nobody really cares about these things. Probably this information and this evidence will never ever be discussed in the mainstream. By the time something as consequential as this would have arrived in the mainstream, the campaign would have long been over. And even if they were to be exposed, they can simply deny. I mean, the nice things about buying likes and projecting a much bigger image of yourself on social media for Agitprop purposes is that whilst one can prove beyond reasonable doubt that the numbers were doctored, it is virtually impossible to prove that the agitator had any knowledge about this. And it is perfectly possible for both of these sentences to be true. I know I myself supported a weird progressive cause that I knew it would harm progressivism tremendously in this country. So I made sure the agitator got as radical as he could, then made sure he has likes and an apparent following, then convinced a friend of his to persuade him to buy Facebook reach, for which I paid for without him knowing, and then encouraged him to go even more radical to get even more support. Rinse and repeat for a few weeks. He could see support growing each time he got more radical, and then when he hit mainstream attention, he had to stick with the message, which kinda ruined the whole political project for him, and in the process severely harming the credibility of the progressive message. Mission failed for him, but mission completed for me since my purpose was achieved. This is called black propaganda, and this is the second example. So, example number 2, hashtag draft our daughters. Now, black propaganda doesn't necessarily have to be false. The most common definition of black propaganda is false information and material that purports to be from a source on one side of a conflict, but it is actually from the opposing side. It is typically used to vilify, embarrass, or misrepresent the enemy. But that's not always true, and hashtag draft our daughters is a perfect example of black propaganda disseminated through means of Agitprop that wasn't exactly false. I mean, Hillary Clinton was on official record supporting the draft of women and also on official record wanting to push as hard as she could on a no-fly zone in Syria in unreasonable conditions which had the potential to trigger a war. Now, not necessarily World War III, but a war nonetheless. So the artists of the hashtag Draft Our Daughters did not spread false information, nor did they misrepresent the actual positions of the enemy. The only thing they did was to put out very real information and logically consistent conclusions from that very real information on a few carefully crafted posters and then write paid for by Hillary for America and put Hillary's campaign logo on it. The only lie was that the posters were paid by the Hillary for America campaign. Well, they weren't. They were crafted by the soldiers of Kick. By the time the Hillary campaign reacted, quite a sizable amount of undecided voters had already seen and believed the ads. Again, let's trace the steps. Step 1. Deploy the case for the political project. In this case, share the posters far and wide. Step 2. Agitators start referencing each other. In this case, the multitude of deplorable accounts starting sharing or retweeting each other. Step 3. Institutional support. Someone got BuzzFeed, albeit briefly, to publish a positive article about the campaign, and that was good enough to get it really going. And step 4, reap the benefits, subversion successful. This example, and the first one that I gave out earlier, illustrate what I was explaining in the first part, namely that when the right uses this tool, it doesn't really need to lie. It's not that rightist agitators are inherently more honest by virtue of being right-wingers, it's just that the right is rarely the establishment seeking to agitate to prop up its own establishment. As a result, it doesn't really have a need to inflate things or to outright lie about the purpose of the message. Anyway, finally, example number 3, the anti-Trump protests. Now, this one in particular will probably fail, but not because the organizers didn't do Agitprop right, but because they lost an important pillar, the institutional support. Remember the 3 pillars: agitators, institutions, and conflict. Again, if you haven't seen part 1, please do so, because I won't go again into the theoretical framework. Now, they got the agitators right, and they got the conflict right, and they also followed the book consciously. It's just that the moment the institutions needed to make this successful are a little bit, well, inefficient. But they got the steps right. So, step 1, put out the case for the political project, in this case the idea that millions of people are genuinely scared of the president-elect Donald J. Trump. Step 2, the self-referencing bubble, in this case overnight Twitter accounts with dubious following, act as news hubs, and then true believers and agitators reference each other. Mind you, a significant chunk of all this is not only Agitprop, but also executed with professional agitators. Anyway, step 3, institutional support, and this is where they're currently failing. The traditional institutional allies, that would be the cathedral media, is doing its best to amplify the message, but no one's buying it anymore. Now, if they will somehow manage to overcome this, they will indeed succeed. And by succeed, I mean they will get some concessions from the administration, maybe some pardons for all the upcoming criminal convictions, and so on and so forth. Now, I know what I would do if I were in their place to overcome this, but I will keep that for myself, since the purpose of these videos is to educate our own side, not to improve the game of the opposition. So yeah, this concludes the informal second part of the Agitprop episode. I guess the only thing that I could say further about this topic is to make videos similar to the one called How to Agitprop Within the Left, in which to provide practical advice and tactics on how to implement this whole thing for our own political projects. Although, as I've shown, folks on our side are indeed slowly picking it up. Anyway, we'll see how it happens. It all depends on how much more time I can squeeze out from my schedule for video making, which hopefully more and more will be available. And with that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.